welcome everybody. You know what you're here for. At least you should know what you're here for. Yes, this is the virtual Bond book launch. Welcome everybody. You know what we do. The first thing that we do is we ask you a very simple question. Can you hear me? I know it's so basic. It's always so basic, but it's really important to figure out if you're hearing us. If you're not hearing us, that's going to be problematic over time, but hopefully you're hearing us. And as soon as I see somebody out there say, I can hear you, David, we're going to just jump right into it. I see a lot of good evening, folks. All right, we're going. And I see somebody say that they can be heard. This is a big deal. All right. Now I've got to remind you what you're here for, because that's really important. The Lost Adventures of James Bond is a book by a gentleman that you're seeing right now, Mark Edlitz. And Mark, welcome to your own virtual book launch. How does this feel right now?
It's very, very exciting. Releasing a book during a pandemic is sort of a challenge, and it's the least of the problems in terms of what's going on, but it's just from my tiny little perspective, to get the word out, it's a bit of a challenge. And normally you would get together with people in a restaurant, and you'd get the back room and get your friends together. We couldn't do that this year. And so I'm so very thrilled and grateful that we're doing it online like this. This is thrilling and ideal.
You know, we're online, but one of the things we all agreed to, and I'd love seeing all the people in the chat room right now, because you wanted to really make a party out of this. And it wasn't just celebrating your book, it was celebrating the Bond community. And, you know, I'd like to kind of kick it off because the impetus of this book is so interesting. I mean, the James Bond universe is greater than many fans might think, even if you've seen all the movies and devoured the Fleming books. And you know, there's just so much more to discover about 007. There's a fascinating galaxy, his words, that to discover about 007. And there's a lot of things that are lost. There's a lot of things that are unmade or out of print or forgotten. But this took a very dedicated Bond fan to put it together. What was the impetus to do this?
So the backstory of the book is twofold. One, as you're saying, there's more to the Bond universe than the films and the novels. There's radio, there's video games, there's comic books, there's, you know, dozens of people who have played 007. It's just not the six or so from the Eon films. And while we mostly concentrate on the films, the novels, just because they're also great, there are other areas to look at. And I was trying to point the flashlight in a direction that is often in the dark, even by obsessive Bond types who like me, often focus on the movies and the novels. When I was putting my first book together, The Many Lives of James Bond, I had a really wide, I would just research anything that seemed interesting to me. There you go, thank you. I would research anything that seemed interesting to me, and I would speak to anybody. Thank you. Irrespective of what was up. And then as I put that together, I realized that book really was a investigation of the character of Bond and interviews with actors who played James Bond. And anything else that was not in that narrow mission statement wasn't a part of that book. But there was all this great material and that I wanted to further explore, and that was all these lost, unmade, and out of print Bond adventures. And so that became a whole book of its own, and it's actually longer than the first book. The first book was 318 pages or so. This one is like 424. So this little offshoot became, obsessive and insane.
So Mark, what's great about this is when you and I talked, you were so passionate about making sure that you shared this with people that you respected and friends. And because they couldn't show up tonight, we've asked Mark O'Connell, Joseph Darlington, and Calvin Dyson to join us instead. But let's start. And I jest. These gentlemen were invited by name. But first, let's start off with another author of Catching Bullets, Mark O'Connell. Welcome.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Hello, good evening, Bond fans. Can I use that line? Is it?
Good evening, Bob.
Yeah, no, I won't do it. I won't. Sorry, Calvin, I took your shtick there.
Patented.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. And I want to say, I get asked to read a lot, and I get sent a lot to read when it comes to the world of Bond, and a lot of it you do dutifully, and you do it, with sincerity. And when Mark contacted me with this, I hadn't actually read the book, and then I finally got it, and I've been reading it this week, and I finished it today. And I genuinely think this is a very important Bond tome. It's a very important notch in the literary timeline of Bond. And my God, there's a lot of research, color, and knowledge in this book. So yeah, I will say from the outset, it's a Roger Ebert thumbs up from me, but it's a really clever work. And I'll go into maybe some depth, but I don't want to spoil things. But from one Mark to another, I think you've done a really, really good job, because it takes this jaded old bullet catcher. It takes a lot to interest me. And I'll say one other thing as well. It's not just a wealth of very good facts and discoveries and interviews. You write really well as well. And that is not something I often say publicly about other people as well. So, yeah, a big triple thumbs up from me.
Nice.
Thank you.
Cheers.
I'm a big fan of Mark's writing. I can't remember what holiday it was, but getting his book paperback, and I try to only read on Kindle, but for some reason I got the paperback and just devoured that over a holiday, sitting on the couch, and just saw that Mark found his own new way into something that we're also familiar about, and his book is inspired, and I highly recommend it. And so I'm thrilled that Mark is joining us today.
No, well, you had me from the cover onwards, but it's one of those rare things where the cover does match the content. So yeah, no, I appreciate the words. And I found our chats the other day from 4 or 5 years ago, and I went, yeah, this. I'm glad to be back here at the genesis of a new one.
I remember Mark also. He was, I think, the first person who ever tweeted me when I was not to me, but I wrote an interview with Roger Moore, and he tweeted it, and I was so excited that Mark was familiar with my work, even though he was more interested in Roger Moore, as we all are, than me. But it was just a thrill. So
well, I'll say one thing, because I remember seeing you, because our sort of literary journey has been a sort of flip. So you started out doing a book about superheroes, and then has gone into Bond. I kind of done it the other way around. I did Bond, and then I've done Superman and Star Wars, and we'll go back to Bond, I'm sure. But one of the things I think is really important, and this Lost Adventures book does bring out, is that you've written it from someone that knows their industry, knows their pop culture, knows their timeline. It's not just Bondy. I think that's where the book comes alive. There's a sense of place and purpose at various points of the timeline, as you'll see, hopefully when you all read it.
And by the way, Mark and I met just a few moments ago at the there's an open bar set up in this room. I took a white wine at first. I'm sure I'll move to something harder. Mark, what did you grab to drink?
I've got some slightly stale No Time to Die Premier champagne that It's kind of lost its sheen, but we'll be getting more. Don't worry. I've got. I'm not going to lie. I've got Co-op Prosecco, and I don't care.
Hey, whatever gets down. That's the important thing. And I believe drinking a Negroni from the open, but I'll say cash bar as well, is Joseph Darlington, another author. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir. I got to tell you, you really did a great job. People would never guess that we are all on one big soundstage, and we've all have had our areas look like our specific studios. So it's pretty nicely done.
We aim to please.
We do. Cheers.
Joe, first impressions of the book. I mean, you kind of dove into this, what wow factor hit your first thing?
I have to tell you, and somebody in the chat's moving pretty fast and furious, which is great. But somebody sort of used the word that I had the whole time reading the book, and that is important. As I was reading this book, first of all, it takes a lot, I think, for guys like us who kind of live and breathe Bond, and pretty much if there's a Bond book that's out, we get it, we read it, it hits the shelf. As I was reading this one, I really did have a sense of, wow. First of all, it takes a lot to really sort of impress one of us with new information that we weren't aware of before. And this was the talk about the subject that I think all of us sort of, we live in the Bond world. We have a lot of what ifs. What if this actually happened? What if this one got another film? As I was reading the story of the possible third Dalton film, and again, I won't give away any spoilers, but honestly, I really did get a sense that this was probably one of the more important films that never actually happened. And there were so many things that were happening in it that I was like, wow. I mean, they were really kind of hitting on a lot of the things that they sort of hit on in some of the later Craig films, in terms of Bond's and overall importance. And I thought, wow, this really is, I think this would have been a sensational film, frankly. And honestly, I get a lot of heat to this day for not being much of a License to Kill fan. But honestly, I sort of feel like in the big scheme of things, License to Kill for me follows that pattern of what I would sort of call sophomore Bond films. When a new actor comes in, they're still sort of getting that groove. And the one that usually comes before their third one, where they kind of get into that groove, they have that sort of sophomore effort. Golden Gun, Tomorrow Never Dies, License to Kill, and I would even say Quantum, where they're still getting their, trying to get a handle on what this Bond is. Who is this James Bond? And there's some growing pains that I find that always sort of happen in the second one. As I read this, I think Dalton would have easily fallen into that same pattern where the third one is their sweet spot. And I really did, again, just sort of marvel at all the could have beens in this. And I felt like a lot of my what ifs were answered. And like I said, it takes a lot to impress somebody who consumes that much Bond information, but this one did it. So, Mark, well done. Thank
you. Yeah, one of the things that we fans always wanted to know, what would the third Dalton film have been like? What would the tone have been? Would it have been more like Living Daylights, which I actually prefer to License to Kill, which is not the popular opinion. Or more like License to Kill. Living Daylights was more of a classic Bond. License to Kill was more of the gritty, realistic Bond. Where would it have been? And there are sort of two answers to that, depending on which version of the drafts you're reading. There's the Alfonso Ruggiero, Michael G. Wilson draft. And then there's the other draft, which was the Osborne Davies draft. And the first one is more of a classic Bond tale, more like From Russia with Love, more like a throwback. And then the other one is an action comedy. And there are certain, amusing moments in the action comedy, including Dalton being in disguise as a cowboy at a rodeo, which tickles me. And Pat illustrated to help us imagine that. He did a wonderful illustration.
Agreed.
But the other would have really played to Dalton's strengths as an actor. It would have been more character driven. And one of the things that I tried to do in discussing it, because one, I got an interview with the co-writer, Alfonso Ruggiero, which I've never heard him interviewed before, and that literally took years to get him to speak to me. Sometimes writing books is an advantage because you're not on deadline and you just write until you're done. So that was a thrill, and he answered some basic questions. There's all this talk about there was a robot in it, and it's Bond versus Terminator, and he sort of provided perspective and put it all in context in a way that takes information that's out there and allows us to better understand what their real intentions were and to get away from the sort of sensational idea of Bond versus Terminator.
Yeah, I like I said, I was really surprised at just how impressed I was with this story, feeling like I was getting, it's almost like you're sort of like novels or offshoot novels by subsequent authors, that kind of thing. You feel like you're getting a new Bond story, but this had kind of like a different sense of gravitas, meaning like this was destined to be canon had this actually happened. So you're sort of feeling like you're getting a little more of an actual Bond story here. So again, well done.
Yeah, and somebody has been kind of doing the etiquette nod, like when they're trying to enter in a group conversation. He is tonight, for your viewing pleasure, dressed kind of like Roger Moore in Live and Let Die, sort of like Archer, but everything Calvin Dyson. Calvin Dyson, welcome to the party.
Thank you. I'm really committing to. I've never actually been to a book launch in real life, so I figured like turtleneck, wine, have my own like little mini quiches. I figured that I'd really commit to this.
Wait, let's see those quiches. Are they ready?
Here we go. They are, yeah, little mini quiches. I went, full A View to a Kill, quiche and red wine. So
I've got. I think I've already showed you this, but I've got my little crudité thing all ready to go.
That looks so much
nicer. Mark
than mine.
Edlitz has been very generous.
I know the spread.
So Calvin, you devoured this. I mean, I actually saw you kind of, pouring into this book. Like Joe and Mark O'Connell, I think we've all walked away with some things, but what do you think overall? General impression?
Oh, I'm continuing the niceties. I'm really sorry, Mark, that you have to sit here and just have all these compliments and niceties thrown at you. But it really was. I feel like, particularly when it comes to the potential Dalton films that we never ended up actually getting, I really appreciated. I'm going to add another word along with important that's already been out there. I'm going to add definitive into the mix, because for me, a lot of this stuff is stuff that I've kind of heard in vague terms on forums or in conversations about like, oh yeah, it was maybe going to have a robot in it or something like that. But I've never actually had a summary of the, the full detailed kind of what the story would have been and all that kind of stuff. And the fact that you've done the legwork and provided that summary and then provided your own observations as well, and then provided the interviews on top of it to give it some more context is just really remarkable and fascinating. And I think fans for years to come are going to be thanking you for that.
And without giving anything away as well, sorry to cut in here, but one of the things I'm always, quite pro the House of Bond, the people that are responsible for all the films and the movies of Bond that we love. And one of the things I think it really underlines is that there was no 6-year gap, like there has been no 6-year gap now. There's these people, the cogs and the water is always going into the Bond factory mill. There is always something happening. And I think particularly those sort of the different, and we're really trying hard. We were told, do not mention spoilers. And I agree with that, because there's so much juice and annoyance in this as well. You're like, what? They were going to maybe do that? But so I'm trying not to give any spoilers to what didn't happen. But I was really, I think for me, the book got that rubber stamp of something worthy and definitive. Yes. When you bring in the Richard Maybaum archives and the talk of Richard Maybaum and the fact that Michael Wilson, who was his co-writer for a few films, was also a driving force of the writing and the thinking, and not just the ownership of Bond because it was theirs, but because they want to try and push things. And one of the things you can see in those Dalton didn't happens is the era of the time as well. I want to say and name things, but I can't. But there's Asia and tower blocks were very much an early 90s thing, and I won't give away any more than that. But I really, personally, as a writer and as a Bond writer, I was really appreciative of seeing the acknowledgement of Richard Maybaum and the quality of what him and Michael know what a Bond film should be. Everyone thinks they can do it, but guess what? Very few can, and I think this book really underlines the work and the toil that goes on behind the scenes at the House of Bond.
Yeah, Mark, I have to agree with you in that, because my first impression of the book when Mark Edlitz was telling me about it was, oh, this will be fun. There's the story of, and this is not a spoiler, you can read it on the descriptor on Amazon, the chase commercial for Daniel Craig. And I'm like, oh, that'll probably be my favorite story. And I do like Timothy Dalton, but I don't tend to gravitate to his films, but I'll read those as well. What I walked away with, and Mark Edlitz, you'll have to excuse us because I think Mark O'Connell and I are fighting not to give too much away, but at the same time, I want to give one little nugget. The behind the scenes goings on let me get a little bit closer to the people that run the franchise. And what I mean by that is you got to know Cubby better. You got to know Barbara better. you got to know Michael G. Wilson better. You saw a lot of their frustration, their trials and tribulations, but also the way they supported and took these screenplay writers, these artists, and just really embrace them like family members. To me, that just was very warming. You know, we can tend to get, and I'll raise my hand first, you know, when there's all these delays, you can tend to get a little snide about the franchise. What are they doing? And you know, what's that mug all about? And question those things. This was a behind the scenes, and I'm not even gonna say it was a love fest, because there were moments where I actually had to put down the book and it made me think. And I am gonna call out one moment, you'll have to forgive me, but it was a very interesting discussion where the powers that be who run the Bond franchise asked the writers, how much do you want to take the piss out of Bond in this next movie? And I thought that was an interesting discussion. It's like, you know, this fallible anti-hero, how much do we want to amp that up? And to me, that nugget right there was just informed me for the rest of the book. It was fantastic.
And it's full of those making bread moments and the lunches at Orsini's and that little LA detail and that LA color and that London detail and that London color. And I think a lot of it's coming from the interviews that are brilliantly laid out in the book. But also, just as I said, Mark's sense of the sheer scale and effort and dedication that goes into making any film, let alone a Bond film, is just immense. And you're right, David's very right. It does get lost in, you know, our annoyances of delays and annoyances of change of directors, which, you know, I always say all the delays on Bond, even the one we're in again now, it's enabling Bond to happen. And I think all of the things that didn't happen in the book were trying to enable Bond to happen in that fallow 6-year period.
And I think just to add to that as well, I think in the book as well, it goes beyond even the sort of the film series as well, like just in terms of, you know, the effort that people put into this kind of stuff, because like the attraction, the ride, you know, there's a chapter in the book on that, and I found that really fascinating as well. Like obviously this is something that does not exist, but Judi Dench was in it as M, Desmond Llewellyn was in it as Q, and this was sort of like a you know, a virtual reality kind of, you know, seeing it through Bond's eyes kind of thing, this ride experience. And just hearing the, you know, someone involved in that talking about the effort that was put into it, all the hard work, and it's something that is, you know, might be forgotten had it wouldn't, you know, if it were not featured in a book like this. And same thing with James Bond Jr. as well. There's a good load of stuff in here about James Bond Jr. that I really got an awful lot out of when you spoke to some of the writers and what the process was like for them. I really got a lot out of that.
I'll tell you what, there was one of the ones that I loved. I thought the interview with John Landis was pretty amazing. And I mean, John Landis, who himself, very accomplished director, speaking to, again, the ability and the knowledge of the powers that be. Landis, I guess it seemed like he never was talking about possibly writing a Bond film, but ultimately, I guess he butted heads a little bit with Cubby Broccoli, because Cubby would have the final say as to what the film was. And Landis, being as sort of at that time, he was very well, you know, he was pretty accomplished director and didn't feel like doing that. But he wrote, and very humblingly, that he made a mistake, that he realized that Cubby Broccoli knows exactly what it takes to make a Bond film. And who was he to decide that he didn't? So I thought that was a pretty interesting moment. I mean, he really did have sort of a revelation, realizing like this guy, he knows James Bond, he knows what he's doing. Right? Who was I to doubt that? Very humbling interview. It was great.
And we get that confirmation. I went to see Burke and Hare, the John Landis Edinburgh movie, whenever it came out. And my husband said, I think I've just seen Michael Wilson dressed as a doctor. And I went, well, he's friends with Landis. And then suddenly it was Ray Harryhausen. I'm actually just really glad that those were confirmed. So you're like, I'm sure I've just seen Michael Wilson as an extra in the back of this sort of Victorian melodrama about blood and decay. But yeah, no, that John Landis stuff is good, because I think the mix of names as well. There's a lot of names and shows that we don't remember or we don't know, even over here, you know, like the Miami Vice and the Wise Guy that Alphonse Ruggiero came from. You know, for me, him and Landis, like you say, Joe, are the meat of it. But there's some other beautiful moments, like the actress Anna Calder Marshall is interviewed because of her father's involvement in more of a literary angle in the 60s and 70s. And there's just, I don't know what it was, but you just see, I can kind of identify with this tiny bit. You just see how sometimes that Bond thing touches families and gives them a pride that they had involvement in it. So that whole stuff with 003 and a half, that I found that really sweet and personal as well. It wasn't just corporate Bond and MGM and 1990. There was a humanity to it, which is all that ever steers any filmmaking, whether it's tiny scale or Bond.
Mark Edlitz, how on earth did you get a conversation with John Landis? How do you go about doing that?
I asked nicely.
Okay, next question.
No, I mean, there's a lot of people who, yeah, I mean, that's the answer. Yeah.
Because he was so giving and,
oh, absolutely.
As we're all saying, so
yeah,
unfiltered.
He talked about two different periods. He talked about the period of writing or trying to write The Spy Who Loved Me in the 70s and what that was like, and how, it was cold in London, and he joked to Cubby, "Oh, I don't have a coat," and so Cubby went out and they got a coat. He introduced him, to royalty, and just how all these players talk about how they are welcomed into this world and not made to feel like amateurs in a system that they are. That the Broccoli's and Saltzman and Eon, they know Bond, yet they're open to other people's ideas of what could be. And they'll provide guardrails and make sure people don't go off, too far there, but they will entertain ideas. And that's what happens when, a director is replaced at the last minute, because they'll empower the directors and they'll stand behind them. And then sometimes sometimes you get bad CGI, but it's because they believe in that director's vision that these things happen. And that's why you get the unusual editing style of Quantum of Solace, because the director, not them, said, "I believe this is going to work." And they said, "Okay, I'm going to support you on this."
Yeah. Mark, it was interesting too, because definitely on that hand that you just talked about. On the other hand, this book really did illustrate to me that the Bond franchise doesn't suffer fools, in the sense that when they do see somebody going off the guardrail, they're very quick to say that's too extreme, or, they have a fundamental idea of where to bring it, which, was that ownership aspect that we all know about and we hear about and we talk about it in platitudes. But this book tells the very specific stories of people that were in the trenches witnessing that, like writers being shipped in from all around the world to do think tanks. And how does that result when somebody throws an outlandish story out?
Well, there you go. I mean, you're referring to the sort of writer's room for Tomorrow Never Dies, where Eon brought all these superstar writers, all of whom could get their own films made, to get together and pitch ideas. And they never did that before, but they gave it a shot. Yeah. Maybaum talks about in one of his, Lost Bond essays about the process of writing a Bond story. And he says that it's not just me. And he says it's not just the director, and it's not just Saltzman and Broccoli. He said the production designer will come in and kibitz, will bring in ideas. Yeah. He says that's the Bond method, is everybody contributes. And sometimes, and John Glenn said this in my other book, where you'll have this idea Bond should ski off the ledge, and then you do the parachute. So you got that as an idea, and now it's up to the writer to come up with how does he get there in the story. So sometimes you have to reverse engineer. Sometimes the writer has to reverse engineer it.
By the way, Mark Edlitz, I don't know if you noticed, but over your right-hand shoulder, two people are coming into the conversation, and we should let them into this group, because Luella Chapman and James Chapman.
Guys.
How are you?
Hello. Cheers.
Cheers.
They're doing it the right way. Those martinis or Vespers?
These are they're not Vespers. I've got a theory about Vespers, but they're absolutely revolting. But these are
they are. I agree.
They are indeed, yes, Mark. Hello. And the reason we are on martinis is, of course, we are based in the UK, so it is 8:30 our time. as opposed to 3:30 your time. So, we don't sit usually drinking martini in the afternoon unless it's in the American bar at Savoy,
Well, we all did breakfast martinis during lockdown. Don't laugh.
I was going to say, don't knock until you try a 3:30 martini. They're amazing.
So the reason we're having this, do the introductions. David, do the introductions. And then
No. Mark, please go ahead. This is a free form.
The reason we're having this event is because of our next two wonderful guests. I would not have thought to have done this or even been brave enough for me to ask David if he would partner with me on this if it weren't for these two distinguished guests. I got an email saying, hey, if you do some sort of virtual launch, please we'll attend or something like that. I'm misquoting you slightly, but that was the gist. And that sort of put this whole thing in motion. And I'm thrilled that you're here with us.
Well, we are too, and it's such a privilege to have been invited because, as you said, Mark, I just emailed you saying, "Oh, are you having something? We'd love to come and join you for it." And and then David, you've been fabulous. We've been watching you on the YouTube, and I think this is such a great event. And it's a bit weird, isn't it, because of everything that's going on? And yeah, we'd all love to be, sitting with you over dinner, or going and visiting you in New York or wherever, and having a really glitzy party with martinis or champagne or whatever. And but I think we're doing well so far. So I think it's been brilliantly organised. So thank you to David as well.
Absolutely, really good. Cheers, David.
Yes,
thank you.
David.
Thank you so much.
So there you go.
Thank you.
That
was very sweet. By the way, I do want to call out, just because Luella and I are sartorial people, James's tie, which is perfect. I mean, that tie may win the evening. Absolutely phenomenal.
No pressure for anyone else then.
Yeah, a number of choices. The posters seem the least problematic of my bum tie, so I went for that one.
So, Luella and James, tell me. I mean, have you had a chance to pour through the book yet?
No, we're waiting for our book to come to us. We're hoping to receive it on Thursday. I think there was maybe because it was being shipped from the US, it's taking a little bit of time, but we cannot wait to read it. We've heard some great things already this evening.
But it also means we can't reveal any spoilers from it, which is probably a very good thing. We can turn back to Mark's Many Lives of James Bond, which is his first volume, which is just a terrific tome.
It is.
And I think that was, Mark, when we first made contact and over that book. And you sent me some of the material and so on. And before we get too inebriated at this end in the UK, what I think we both like to say, and Mark will go as a sort of reasonable shade is red maybe as all these compliments come in. People have said rightly how about the importance of interviews, of collecting these memories. We only think back, Bond films we think of being pretty contemporary, but a lot of people from the early days are sadly gone and have been gone for some time now. So I think Mark's work in sort of collecting these interviews, this testimony, so we have it as a published record, is absolutely essential for those of us who are interested in Bond, both as fans, in our case also as academics and scholars, but perhaps preeminently as fans. So thank you to that. But also, and this is something that people who don't know Mark, we don't know Mark actually. We know him virtually. We've yet to meet physically, and we hope once this horrible pandemic is over and so on that we'll have the opportunity to do that. But really, just let's pay tribute in the serious 30 seconds or so that I'll go on for, to Mark's incredible intellectual generosity in sharing material, in making his research available to other people with an interest in the field, without any preconditions and caveats or anything. You've been a real supporter of Bond scholarship, Mark, and we're really looking forward to reading Edlitz Mark II.
Edlitz Mark II, but also coming in on the the generosity. I mean, my first contact with Mark was for Mark actually saying, "Oh, can I help you out with your book?" And he, you know, he's just so lovely in that way. And I also think that comes across in your writing, Mark, as well. You know, it's just so accessible to everyone, you know, and it's, you know, you're so modest about it as well. You know, just they really are just, it's so brilliant, your work, and we so can't wait to read this next book. And it's been great even just to see the covers being shown tonight. You know, you'll notice as well we have Daniel joining us this evening. He is here in celebration.
Looking good.
With us. You know, and it's just your work, the amount of work you put into this, you know, because both James and I know from like researching Bond, it's not easy, is it? And I'm sure, you know, Mark and Joseph will attest to this as well. You know, you can't just like write a book in 5 minutes, you know, you've really got to put the effort in, and that just really shines through in all of your work. And, you know, it's fantastic. So, you know, I mean, I know probably at the moment you're probably a bit knackered, but, you know, you never know, there might be a third one. You never know.
Never say never, Mark.
Well, you have a book coming out next year?
Yes, I do, yes. I mean, I'm sure David, I hope everyone will be interested, but particularly David, it's on, it's Fashioning James Bond, Costume, Gender and Identity in the World of 007, and that's being published with Bloomsbury. And I do actually draw on some of Mark's interviews in his first book, The Many Lives of James Bond, with Janie Tamine. So yeah, so that's really useful. But as Mark's probably experienced with interviewing people, you know, it's very hard to pin these people down, isn't it? You know, it's very, particularly from a tailoring and fashion perspective, because these people fall off the radar very quickly. They pass away, you have to find family members, you know, their tailoring firms don't survive in the same way because it's very much their business rather than a you know, an established business as you would get with other sorts of clothing companies now. So, you know, I do appreciate the amount of effort you've put into all these interviews, you know.
I always thought that his Bond's wardrobe is part of his character. It's not just something that he wears. It's his opening salvo in how he deals with people. It's you know, it's Superman's cape. It's designed. It's a design based on something he's trying to engender in other people. It's not
Yeah.
One thing that I found very much in common, Luella, with your project that you're coming out with next year, and Mark Edlitz, what you did is that when you're interviewing people forget. I know in speaking with Janie sometimes will say, like, I have no idea what boots he wore. You know, I have no idea, you know, what I was thinking at that point. There was rows and rows of boots, and I chose one. And Mark, I think there was somebody in your book that I won't, again, spoil anything, but, you know, basically said the facts are fuzzy. If I can find it somewhere, you'll know the facts. But other than that, this is what people forget is these are people's jobs in a moment in time, and then they move on. And Luella, I'm sure you had your own trials and tribulations with that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, particularly in terms of, and this is just generally if you're researching just film and costume, not just James Bond, you know, although, you know, in James Bond, in some ways it's surprising because it's such a long running franchise. But, you know, I mean, because of these tailoring firms, you know, the tailors pass away, their family don't continue the business, you know, they don't keep records, you know, they don't meticulously keep stuff, you know, some things. I mean, I was in contact with Gives and Hawkes, you know, that I think a flood in 1970 destroyed their records from previously, you know, all sorts of things happen. But tailors, like you're saying, David, they live in the moment. They don't live for the future. And, you know, they're not like Richard Burton, who writes his memoirs or his diaries that he intends to be published. Or, you know, like someone like Stanley Kubrick, who hoards an archive and intends that to be donated somewhere. You know, you just don't get that with fashion and costume in a way that you get with other people. So, you know, and like you were saying, you know, Mark, in your interview with Janie Tamime and everything, and David, what you were saying, you know, costume designers, they're an interesting breed in a sense, because in some ways they do remember things, but also they like to massage the truth as well, don't they? They like to fit with their own narrative of, oh, this is my James Bond, this is the armor I gave him, when actually it's very similar to the armor they may well have been given in Goldfinger. But I think there's a wonderful interview with Emma Porteous that I discovered where she's saying you never admit to anything as a costume designer, and I think that's very true. Your work is your art. So
or as a writer as well, and you, both of you should probably identify with that. So.
Yes. Yeah. Or rather, we don't reveal anything until after it's published, and then
did I say that? There's a lovely quirk in Mark's book that I love, and it's when he lists the 34-ish guys who've also played James Bond, and I love what the last one says with the redacted. I thought that was cute.
Yeah. James, coming out. You're working on another edition of one of your books. Is that accurate?
That's correct. License to Thrill, which is a book I wrote about 20 years ago, the first edition, and was a little bit of a punt in the sense of I'm a film historian, I'm a British cinema scholar, and there was a sense at the time, I think, that if you're doing film studies, film history, you were looking at serious films, and the Bond films were not deemed as being serious films and so on. But it was nice that the book got a recognition from general readers and from Bond fans. I've had some really great letters and emails over the years. I mean, the first edition came out in the days when you still did get, hard copy letters sent to you and so on.
Didn't you get a poem?
I once had a poem, that somebody penned, very kindly penned a sort of appreciation. But this is the thing, and Mark, but you both know this, Joe, you know this. It's you write a book on Bond, and unless it is right now, because of the delay and so on to No Time to Die, you write a book on Bond, and it's immediately out of date. You always try and time these things, to ride the kind of wave of media interest round about the release of a new film. But by definition, you can't include the new film before the new film's out. So they date very quickly, and that happened with License to Thrill. There's a whole range of new films out since. So I'm doing a new edition, which, all being well, I hope it's going to come out in October of 2022 to coincide with the 60th anniversary of Dr. No, but it is somewhat dependent.
And the premiere of No Time to Die, which is great.
No Time to Die also be out. So I want to include No Time to Die. So if that's delayed any further, it might get pushed back a bit.
So
I
keep
have a
asking
question.
me why it's taken me 10 years to write a second book. You've nailed it. That's it.
So Joe, just because you warmed up your lungs, I do have a question for the writers. So Calvin and I appreciate you guys slumming it by spending time with Calvin and I, but this is for all the authors in this room. And Joe, we're going to start with you. There has got to be a challenge when you write a book, or even when you envision writing a book, the whole idea of, and I hate to use this word because I know it's a dirty word, selling the book, which is, part of what we're doing tonight is we're trying to get the word out to people, to be curious, to be intrigued, titillated by Mark Edlitz's tome that he created. So Joe, even when you're doing Being James Bond, what's the hardest part about getting the message out there and getting people intrigued enough to pull the trigger on purchasing your book?
Boy, that I'll tell you what, I'm much more interested in hearing other people's answers to that, because that to me is still a sort of a mystery, how you actually do that. I guess, I suppose for me, it's I do have a tiny advantage just by having a YouTube channel and a podcast. So I guess, I kind of build the audience first, and then suddenly I have a book out and they say, oh, by the way, I have a book out in case you'd like to purchase it. I guess that would be my answer. But like I said, I'm much more curious to see what everybody else says to that.
Mark O'Connell, what about you?
I find I'm kind of circling something else, a new book at the moment, and I've been circling it for a lot of this year. And a tiny bit of that is procrastination, but also if you don't know what it is in your head yourself, you don't know what it is to describe to a publisher or describe to anyone. So I think what Mark's book here has done is the USP, unique selling point, is that title, The Lost Adventures of James Bond. That there's already a frame and a hook. And I think when anyone's writing about Bond, it's such a sprawling franchise and mine to tap into. So you've got to find what your angle is. Mine was personal. This one is the near misses, the sidebar thing, and the things that did happen as well. I think one thing about Mark's book is the things that did happen, like some of the choose your own bits. I remember them, and seeing those covers suddenly in Mark's book, I was like, yes, I remember that. But yeah, just it's, you can spend as, I don't know if the Chatmans will agree or share this, but the hair time, and that can be research, or that can just be thinking, taking a stand back. Because I'm circling something at the moment, and I'm just like taking lots of steps back, and it is like a painting on a wall. You're like, does it need another coat? Is that the right color? Yeah, it takes time, but having a USP helps, and I think Mark's got that with this one easily.
Agreed. All right, the Chapmans. What about you? What's that kind of spearhead hook, if you will?
I mean, I think as well, I mean, like everything that, Mark O'Connell's just said, we agree with. It's about having a unique position in the Bond scheme. I mean, for us, it's a bit, on one level, we, like with all the other books, have to have a unique selling point. But also it's difficult in a sense for us, because our books are being published by an academic publishing route. Unfortunately, they're uber expensive. So, they price us out of the brilliant market that you could have for bonds. And what we do also love about Mark Edlitz's books, and also everyone else's books that are speaking this evening, is you have a really nice price for your books. It's brilliant. So we have to find other ways, like, to find that unique selling point. And also the other thing, like Mark O'Connell was just saying, is the important thing for an academic is also to write accessibly, not write in funny language that no one understands, or, use funny terms that no one's ever heard of. We both of us hate that. I mean, I'd say for my book, like, why should you spend an extraordinary amount of money on something? Well, I have Sean Connery's suit measurements from 1962. There you go. If you want to know what
You had me at Sean Connery.
Please buy this book. I'm sure you've got a line for yours, about why should you spend 80 quid?
I come in, it's we're academics, so we're at a low rent end of the market. It's a high rent in terms of price, but we're dealing in, you sell 1,000 copies, and it's a bestseller in that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'll make this point. Writing a book about James, sort of 20, 30 years ago, there was you get your Bond shelf, and you've got 6 books. You got Ray Benson's book, and Steve J. Rubin, and John Boston. Really important foundational works in good quality critical writing about Bond. Now you've got a more crowded market. And that's good, because it means that there's interest in the subject, it's taken off. But writing a book on Bond is a bit like producing a Bond film. It's about familiarity and difference. So the field you're engaging with. Bond is the common denominator of all these things. That's what links them all together. And so every Bond film has sort of got to be more or less like other Bond films to get the Bond fans to go and see it. But at the same time, you're not going to go and see it if it's exactly the same as every other film. So the producers, the writers have to bring in the variation, and the variations in the locations, the stunts, the particular variations of the type of villainy and all those sorts of things we're used to. And so I think we're doing the books on the Bond films. It's a bit like that. We're dealing with the same thing, but we just need to have our own particular variation on it.
And there's just one thing I'd like to add to that as well, which is just like a Bond film is impossible to make without the massive crew and cast involved. A book is impossible to write without your friends around you, your Bond fans, your friends, your lovely people being so generous with their time and sharing anecdotes and thoughts with you. And I just like to sort of finish, because I know you want to move on soon, but Mark Edlitz was absolutely so generous and kind with sharing things. So cheers, Mark.
So here's to Edlitz, Mark Edlitz.
And your brilliant book.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I love how the Chapmans keep toasting, by the way. That is phenomenal.
It's great, isn't it? No, I'm loving
It's a
this.
British thing, isn't it? It's a British
I'm going to be
thing,
feeling
yeah.
really
Cheers.
good soon.
By the way, I've got to tell you, before the Chapmans leave us to please, have more libations, one of the things that you've all done so successfully, and I'll call out Mark Connell in a very positive way, is that you've all used nostalgia. You've wielded nostalgia like this wonderful broadsword, and you've struck us all in the heart. Because as I read all your books, and I remember reading Mark O'Connell's for the first time, and I had to keep closing it. And I had to keep thinking about my own experiences that he had on the school grounds, finding pogs and finding toys and, looking for the TV guides and things like that. And how did I do that? And you've all done that so successfully. And Mark Edlitz, hats off to you. The biggest compliment I can give you is that you struck an emotional chord, because I'm not reading this purely for research. I'm reading this for the sheer joy and for bringing me back to a time that was a little bit simpler, a little bit safer, and a little bit happier. And Chapman's, you've been a pleasure. And by the way, Luella, when you come out with your book, please, I would love to talk to you about it.
Oh, I'd love to talk to you too. And, this book launch is going so well. You are very welcome to, help me with my own virtual book launch.
Love to.
Mark Edlitz can be the special guest.
Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Okay, well, thanks everyone, and thanks for inviting us.
Well, at some point, this COVID, situation will, I'm sure, finish,
Yes.
and we'll meet up in the flesh. But cheers to Mark, and congratulations on your second book on Bond. And I know it's going to be as great as the first one was. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you for coming.
Bye.
Cheers, everyone. Be well. Thank you. So I have to ask Calvin Dyson something, because first of all, Calvin, people are noticing your background and, all the different cover arts and things like that. We've got to talk about a term that I think a lot of authors bristle at, and that is don't judge a book by its cover. But, the cover of this book is pretty impressive. And we have somebody coming into the room here that may have something to speak about that. Ladies and gentlemen, entering into the room is Sean Longmore. Sean, welcome to the party.
Hello, how are you? Hello, everybody. It's great to see
Sean.
you all.
Sean, creator of these artworks that you can just about see above me. There are more out of frame. I buy pretty much everything that he creates.
By the way, Calvin, that's pouring salt into my wound, because I found Sean. We're going to talk about Sean like he's not here for a second. I found Sean too late, tried to order the Daniel Craig stuff. He had run out, and I've been depressed ever since. So please don't show me that.
I'm sorry to rub salt in the wounds, but
It's okay.
Hi, Sean. How are you?
Hello, I'm okay. It's lovely. I must say, I always get excited when you do a video and it's your every other video, because I know I can see the bottom of my work in that.
Yeah.
Because you see the walls when you're doing them.
Sean, I gotta say, I feel like I've kind of cracked a code here, because I'm looking at your On Her Majesty's in the background.
Oh,
and suddenly it's coming together. I'm like, wow, that's a lot of what your work kind of vibes a little bit sometimes.
Absolutely, those guys inspired me. I've got Goldfinger and You Only Live Twice above me here as well. So
Nice.
it's kind of shaped me as a designer as I've gone along. So I've got a lot to thank Bond for sure.
So Sean, how you gotta start us off here. How did you get involved with this project? Maybe it's a conversation between you and Mark, but we want to hear the story.
Yes, so I done, and hello, Mark. I think I've said hello. Public. I really like that you've matched your shirt to the color we chose for the front of the book. Love that. I just done my very first sort of fan piece for No Time to Die, and I'd put that online as a sort of, well, I'm in lockdown, and here's me doing something just for the sake of it. And then Mark sent me an email, and I think I nearly bit his arm off straight away as soon as he emailed me, because Bond books have always been such a big part of my life. I love Bond reference books. I want to know everything about James Bond. I can remember I was telling Mark that when I was young, I had the Essential James Bond book, and I took it out of the library for 2 years straight, to the point that they had to come round to my house to come and get it back. So that's the book. That's the book. And so as a kid, I was obsessed with that, and then that's just kind of grown with me. I've read your book, Mark. I've just collected all this stuff over the years, and so then when Mark messaged me, I was like, yeah, absolutely, I'll do it straight away.
So first of all, for those of you out there in the chat room, a couple people are asking. I just want to kind of share very quickly and then also pose a question. So right here on your screen, right about now, you should be seeing one of the covers. Now, Sean, this is this the United States cover, or is go a little bit wider than that?
I'll let Mark answer that one,
So,
actually.
the cover, where the covers are, and we should get into the sort of the creative process about them, has more to do with the printers. Each printer had a different set of dimensions, and so mostly the Dalton's on Amazon, and mostly the other one is for bookstores and libraries. And there's just it's not interesting. There's just different systems in place to get it to each bucket.
Okay, so the other one that you're referring to, because I actually got a kick out of this, which I didn't know in that, let's see if I can share the other one. Give me 1 second. Technical issues abound. Here we go. I didn't realize there was a second one until I saw Calvin Dyson post his. So this is the second cover, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
So let's talk about, so to get the cover is something that I had sort of been, not sort of, I have been agonizing about for a long time. And I would look at all these wonderful Bond covers, and I would always download them on my phone. And I had this big mood board of Bond images and covers that I liked and admired. And Sean is such a talented artist, and he is able to take so many different disparate images and bring them together and still not be cluttered. It's one of his many talents, and that is no easy feat. But for when you're picking out a postage stamp size book cover on Amazon on your phone, you might need a different approach. And I felt bad that I was asking this hugely talented artist who's so good at taking so many different images to just pick one simple image. And I remember, I think I asked you, Sean, is this okay? Is this okay that we're taking this approach? Am I impeding your creative muse?
Yeah, I remember at the end of that conversation, I remember just sort of thinking, like me, the guy that puts explosions and lasers over everything. Like I finish a piece and I'm like, what does this need? Where can I fit more explosions in? And when Mark said simple, I was kind of like, I was like, oh no. Now then suddenly I felt a little bit of dread. I was like, oh no, how on earth can I can't do simple. I can't help myself kind of thing. But you were really patient with me, Mark, because we went through quite a few different creative ideas, and there were some earlier on that were a little bit more hectic. There was one really bonkers one where I had sort of like I made a 7 out of the gun barrel circles and then the script pages sort of falling away.
Wow.
And it was just not quite right for what it needed to be. And Mark was really good at sort of coming back to me. We, like he said, we had mood boards. We were going back through different ideas, and it was Mark's idea, one of his very early ideas, to have the image of sort of Dalton fading. That sort of idea that everything's sort of coming apart because it's getting lost. So it's that lost story element, which I loved straight away.
But I didn't have any idea how to make that a practical thing. That's all Sean and his idea of, putting Dalton there and the color scheme and the barrel. This is all Sean's idea of the gun, and he just had this is just a proof copy. It's not the actual one of having the gun there. There you go. That's what it looks like. Of having the gun there and the papers coming out, and he said, I've got this idea about script pages, and I didn't really understand it, but you trust an artist and you back an artist and you let the artist create. And I always tried not to say anything that would get in his way or be a stumbling block, because he knows how to do this and I have no idea.
Yeah.
And
Which is, can I just cut in here? That's kind of what the narrative of the content of the book is about. It's about new artists coming in and not, letting them breathe, letting them explore. And that's curious that you said that, because that's exactly what Alfonso Ruggiero does, and what the other named names and the other moments in Bond's time. Just like you said earlier, the Broccoli's and the House of Bond, they allow their collaborators to breathe and to stretch themselves and to find themselves. And I think that's exactly what you've done here with the cover and what Sean's done. And well, Sean already knows, but I'm personally a massive, massive fan of what Sean does. I love the chaos of those images, because they shouldn't work. And you're right, the placement is such a psychological thing, and he gets it. And I know it's informed by that Asian Thai Japanese ethic or art ethic, but I think his No Time to Die great pan paperback is kind of stunning, and I'm very happy to have a copy of that.
Does anyone have a copy that they can hold that up or in handy?
I do, but I'm kind of plumbed in here.
Okay, no worries.
I'm like
Calvin.
Darth Vader at the moment, so
It's here
Calvin,
somewhere.
'cause
I
I
seem
knew
to have
Calvin would have
everything.
something.
And,
Calvin, as you're gathering that, you've been a consumer of Sean's. There you go. That's the one I want, by
It's
the way.
absolutely
FYI.
beautiful. Yeah.
yeah, that's the one. That's the one with the
And
beautiful glider and the flames. Yeah.
Okay, does everybody have these except for me? Let's not get into it. It's rude. But Calvin, talk to us. You're a consumer of Sean's creativity and product. Tell us the why behind it. What you could be hanging up a lot of things on your wall.
That is a very good question, actually. But it is like, just to talk about the level of detail in there, and the level of, like, I've got the GoldenEye poster that you did just out of frame here, and it was honestly like, over the course of weeks, I just sort of sit back and look at it, and I would notice something different. Like, I would see like the actual GoldenEye device in there, sort of like hidden away in a couple of spots and whatever. And it was I love that. I love that you can just, you don't just take it in the once. You sort of, it stays with you for so much longer afterwards. And I always feel like I'm noticing new things in all of them. I literally buy everything. I'm such a fanboy. It's kind of ridiculous.
Calvin's been feeding me for the past couple of months.
I was chatting. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say that we've never like spoken in real time before. This is the first time. It's normally just like over Messenger, and it's normally me sort of like demanding, like, to the minute, like, when his new prints are going to go live to buy on Etsy. I'm like, let me know, damn it.
I was having a chat with Calvin in a WhatsApp thing. We were just the two of us, and we were like literally hand fanning. Like, are we fangirling over Sean's work? Because it's just like, it's like too good. It's too much. But it's not just that you know your Bond, you know your commercial art history as well. Very few people, it's especially with technology now, and I do a little bit of Bond design myself, but it's more sort of chalk and crayons and slate compared to what you do. But you know, there's not many Bond designers or Bond homage designers at the moment who are doing pan paperbacks, or the Scandinavian 80s one you did, which you sent me a copy of as well. I'm like, I didn't ever think I was the only one into that, and you have some interesting thoughts on the triad ones, and that's, you look as young as I do, so that's really interesting to see someone that's maybe a bit younger aware of the history of commercial art and commercial Bond art as well. So I was really pleased when I saw that you were the cover designer of this one. It made total 20 cents.
We have some chat room questions specific to Mark Edlitz and to Sean, and it has to do with the cover, because a lot of people in the chat room have been consistently saying it. They feel like Timothy Dalton was robbed, that he had another one in him. It's about time. And this cover is really, it has to be a bit of a megaphone of obviously the direction you wanted to take, the amount of interest level, like it's in the chat room right now.
Yeah,
was that a defined move on your part?
that was a discussion that Sean and I were having a lot of. It's like, what is that's why there's two different covers is what is the central image? Should it be, people do Bond, they do, a Bond actor, you do the Bond actor of record, or do you do the first Bond actor, or do you have to do them all? And then it gets a little messy. Or can you take an image like the gun and make it representative of all of Bond? And it was one of the struggles that Sean and I.
Yeah, we had a lot of back and forth about that. In particular, as I personally don't think I've seen a lot of reference books out there that do focus on putting Dalton there on the cover. So it was kind of also with Mark being brave enough to sort of be able to do that. And we were having that conversation of, is there sort of a Dalton renaissance going on right now? Are people really sort of like starting to like love him a lot more than maybe he would have done in the past?
Joe, that's come up in several of your conversations, how, Dalton has come back into your life. And I don't mean that in the most romantic of ways, but you want to speak to that? This is exactly how I like Joe muted. Like, you may want to unmute.
I guess that would help. I'm sorry. I was sort of remixing my drinks before. I didn't want all the
Smart
the
man.
ice clinking. But yeah, it's funny how we're talking about sort of a Dalton renaissance, because I sort of feel like I almost feel like a couple years ago we might have been having a similar conversation about On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Where suddenly now Bond fans are rediscovering that one and sort of recognizing it for what I think is the classic that it is. And I feel like we could very well be in the midst of a Timothy Dalton renaissance, where people are really starting to look at him. I've sort of always thought, boy, Dalton really is in many ways the quintessential James Bond. It's funny because I've always said that, if somebody asks me, your favorite films to your least favorite films, some Bond fans get squeamish. I don't want to diss any Bond films. For me, it's like, I'll talk my favorite and I'll trash my least favorite all day long. We're all friends. We can do that. When it comes to favorite Bonds, that's where I do get a little more like, that's like picking your favorite kid. I really do.
Easy for me.
There you go. I feel like at the risk of being over diplomatic, I feel like that's where I do sort of feel like every Bond actor has always brought something to the role, and they all meant something different at a different point in time. So to me, they're all fantastic. Dalton really does have that Fleming feel. Like I really do feel like when you watch the opening of The Living Daylights, when they're doing the sniper scene, that is Ian Fleming come to life. In a way that I think a lot of films don't necessarily do that. So yeah, I kind of feel like in some ways I've sort of been there all along. I think Dalton has been fantastic. And again, as much as when I nitpick License to Kill, it probably comes from a place of like, I know that he's a perfect Bond. So I kind of felt like, but again, I feel like that third one easily could have been just a blockbuster.
Your description of this kind of renaissance is interesting, because as I was reading Mark Edlitz's book, and even as I looked, Sean, at your cover, and I kept kind of flipping back and forth, I realized that the stories were actually making me more sympathetic, even empathetic to Dalton. That third one, without giving anything away, literally, I just wanted to rip it from the pages and tell somebody to make it. The second one made me frustrated because I thought it was really off-brand and missed the mark. Now I'm getting people curious. And then that fourth movie one, I'm just like, guys, no, look what you can do with this. I mean, look how you can bring this back. So you're rooting on the sideline. You're kind of pulling them into those conversations.
Yeah, and I think as well, sort of, sorry to I'm going to throw some more praise at Mark, if that's okay.
How dare you?
As I've been reading through, because I didn't know the true extent to what Mark had done with this book, of how far he's gone, and he's covered Dalton so well, but it's also everything else he's done. The in-depth look at James Bond Jr., which I'm still waiting for you to pick up the reviews again, Calvin. Just so you know, I'm starting an official petition at some point. I keep bothering Calvin about that. But also going further than that, I was reading last night the very sort of end section of the book, and can I talk about who you've here, Mark? The interview with Blair Farrington. And I was like, that's so niche. I love it. And for anyone at home, Blair Farrington he was originally the understudy, and then he took on the role of James Bond for the on-stage Oscars For Your Eyes Only sort of tribute, which is really bonkers. It's got Richard Keel and a guy stroking a stuffed cat, and they take off in an actual rocket at the end. And it's so cool. And I was reading that and I was like, wow, I had no idea working with you. I knew you were going really in depth, but wow, I was really just impressed with like the next level. You can tell a real Bond fan has put this book together, and it just comes from a place of like real love more than anything else.
Can I bring up a potentially controversial discussion? And I'm not saying it's controversial that people are going to want to, cling off here. But one of the things that I noticed in a lot of the stories, especially the upfront stories, is when they're talking about weighing out the different versions of Bond, meaning Bond as a capable, unflappable individual versus Bond as making a lot of mistakes. Bond being, kind of being the subordinate in a movie or a screenplay. And as a fan, and I wanted to this is my confession time to all of you who I all consider friends, I felt as I was reading these stories, like a part of me felt much better about the new movie coming out, and a part of me started to get a little like, ooh, I want to make sure these things are all put into place, and I don't want anything to throw off my, perfectly formed nostalgic, franchise. Because as I read some of the, I won't even call them missteps, decisions in here, they made me a little bit nervous. I mean, what was everybody's visceral feeling about the franchise in the future after reading this? Big question.
Personally, fine, because there was potential missteps. There was like some of the Dalton elements in those. I love the paragraphs, the way it's written as well. Some of them, were they missteps? They might be missteps when we're looking back in 2020, but had the film come out in 1991 or 1992, I don't know, they could have been missteps too. But I think the important thing is that they were trying, and they were investigating, and they were pursuing, and they were talking. There's a great line that that Mark picks up that Richard Maybaum put. I think he wrote it in one of his essays that Mark brilliantly taps into. I loved when I saw that mention of University of Ohio, is it? Or
Iowa or something. Yeah.
Iowa. It's one of the 4-letter place states. Yeah. Have you counted the votes yet? No. There's a great line from Maybaum where it says, you can get 2 collaborators in a room, and the arguing is good, because if they don't argue, there's 1 collaborator too many. And I thought that was it's an insight from Maybaum, but it's also an insight from Mark that he put that in. So I don't, I think every era of Bond production has different things it has to contend with. They probably crop up, I mean, the biggest thing is the biggest global thing ever that Bond is now contending with, and that hopefully will steer through that in times to come. But no, I just saw it as a rich registry of just the effort, and that sort of, I don't know what it is, but that sort of Broccoli mind, and that Wilson mind, and that Maybaum mind, which has now moved into Purvis and Wade and other people. It's, my God, do you guys ever just settle down and pick something? And I don't mean that derogatory. It's like there's so many ideas, and I think any franchise that has got so many ideas bouncing around, whether it's in 91 or 2021, I think is in a good, healthy state.
That's a good point, because the fact that, and the one I'm referring to without giving too much away, is one that kind of had a little nods to, dare I say, Casino Royale 1967, where, it would have been a little slapsticky. It would have been a little more comedic. It would have been a more of Bond, tripping over himself, almost Austin Powerish in some ways, just short of that. I think they knew enough to put the cleaver down on that and say, no, that's absolutely not the right way to go. And in fact, wound up making one of the harder, more maniacal, more focused Bond films coming from that. Calvin, what about you when you were reading this? I mean, warm and fuzzies, shock and awe.
Oh, a mix of both, I think. I mean, we've already talked about the robot, the cyborg, like the artificial intelligence, whatever you want to call it. Like, it
didn't work for Superman 3.
I mean, that is one of those things that, and
Sorry,
I'm speaking as a Moonraker
fan.
I'm speaking as a Moonraker fan here, so I'm fine with Bond going, all out sci-fi, science fact, if you're Cubby Broccoli, however you want to refer to it.
Science fact, not science fiction.
But even reading that was just kind of like, that would have been a really interesting, because it's then how it kind of affects the films that come after it as well. Like, there is a tendency for Bond, you hit You Only Live Twice, Moonraker, Die Another Day, and things get so fantastical, and then it just always naturally resets itself. And it would have been interesting to see, what would have happened if something like that, if like a Terminator kind of character existed in Bond. Like, we've never had that kind of like humanoid artificial intelligence in the series before. So I don't know if it put my back up as such, but it was just a really interesting, like, oh wow, that is something that would have really changed sort of what expectations would be for Bond films moving on. So I thought it was interesting from that perspective.
Robots and Bond gave me a feeling, and Mark O'Connell, you're kind of our trivia nostalgia guy for the 80s and 90s, but it reminded me of the movie with the moving robots with Magnum PI. He starred in it. Does anybody remember that film?
I Rode to
Runaway.
China? No.
Runaway. No, Joe got it. Runaway.
Yeah.
Do you remember
Great
Runaway
movie,
with
actually.
those little spider robots? That's what it
Totally.
reminded me of, that
Yeah.
treatment.
Oh yeah.
Right? A little bit.
But Bond, I mean, that what was happening with what Mark outlines with those Dalton drafts, and that is the meat of this sandwich. Let's go there. Although there's a lot of decent bread as well around the sandwich, but the meat of the sandwich is the Dalton stuff for me personally. But what it does is it reflects how Bond was, the Bond eye was where is cinema now? Where is pop culture now? And the whole. And people say a Bond nowadays with Daniel Craig, it's reacting to Bourne. Well, I hate to tell you, but that Bourne franchise didn't end well and started years ago, and Bond's kind of overtaken it now. But what Bond is actually doing right now, the thing that it's echoing with the Daniel Craig era, is it's echoing those multi-story arcs, those Game of Thrones dramas, those HBO era that we're in. So it's suddenly fine that 5 films can actually have some connective tissue. But back in 91, we were looking at Terminator and Die Hard, sort of Asian things, and gay MI6 guys and all of that. And it's a great document of what ifs, and I the robot thing does scare me, not so much it was in a Bond film, but more that it was 1991, and not every film was really Terminator 2 when it came to depicting robots and technology. And I was just kind of cautious of what sort of budget and but it didn't happen, and also the fact it didn't happen meant that GoldenEye 1995 with Pierce Brosnan did, and that's another thing the book brilliantly touches upon, and we've seen it in other books, but where that element, I think that's what they used in Skyfall or something similar, or they changed it and did that. And Bond might throw a lot of ideas out there, but they often scoop them up and just keep them, nicely secure in a bottom drawer.
I'll tell you, one of the things that I noticed about that, it was funny how I was reading the third and possibly fourth Dalton film. I was really starting to get a sense of, like, do you think the filmmakers already know how this plays out, where we start out kind of Bondish, we get kind of hit our groove, and then we get really sci-fi? I mean, Connery goes to You Only Live Twice, Moore goes to Moonraker. Do they sort of have, like, we already know where this is headed, where we're going to hit our stride, and then eventually we're going to get so science fiction and space age that we're going to have to pull it back in? But maybe,
no,
I don't know. It's hard to.
No, I think they always look at the now. Yeah, I mean, although there was that.
True.
I mean,
Much to Calvin's disappointment.
Yeah, there's another. What Mark does. There's a great moment where I think, was it Jerry Giroux is interviewed, who was the publicist for Eon for many, many years, and he talked about, we're working on 2 films with this actor, because it takes 11 months to prep, it takes 11 months to get a first draft, or all of that, and so they do look ahead. But I think it's hard enough to make one Bond film. There's always this. Can they do 2 back to back? And it's what I've got notes here, which maybe Bam calls the bumps of Bond, and I don't think you can. It's hard enough to work out what the bumps are, for No Time to Die. What will they be for Bond 25? Yes, they might have an eye on Bond 26 for obvious new era, next generation reasons. But no, I think they just work on what they're working on right now.
I think you're absolutely correct. And I sort of said that kind of half jokingly, but honestly, you're absolutely right. You had said something before, Mark, which I thought was spot on. It's funny, as we as Bond fans and Bond connoisseurs, we love to sort of play the continuity game in our own minds. But at the end of the day, we all sort of know that every Bond film is a moment in time. And it is literally an answer to the question of what do fans want today. Yeah. So you're absolutely correct on that.
There's been. Oh, go ahead, Mark.
No, there was a Bond fan on Twitter, and he was wondering. I think he put the question out, and I got tagged in about what was the first Bond reboot, and I said Doctor No, because first off, it's a reboot of the character in popular culture, i.e., putting it out there. And the trick of Doctor No is it pretends we've missed 2 or 3 films already, and that's kind of a great template and recipe that was really rare. And I watched Doctor No over the summer, and I'm like, God, this film. I'm like, no, there was none before. That's right. Yeah, I had to think about it.
By the way, I'm going to tease the entire chat room and whoever's watching this video right now. The price of admission, the price of this book, if nothing else, and I know Mark O'Connell, good point, said that the meat of this is Timothy Dalton. There is one part in here where they talk about starting Bond off in the beginning. There is a description of his adventure in becoming 00 that is not Casino Royale. That story in itself is worth the price of admission. So check it out. But Sean, there are 2 questions that came in for you specifically. All right. Number 1, they want to know, how did you pick the image of Dalton? Why this image, for example, versus all the other ones? It's pretty badass, but we want to hear from you. And second of all, did you have the luxury of any excerpts or any copy or any content of the book to help your vision, to help inspire you?
So the image in particular, we went through a couple. We were trying, most of them were from Dalton's shoot in The Living Daylights. I don't know if that was more of a personal thing or if Dalton just looks a little bit more iconic than his images in License to Kill. And especially the License to Kill haircut. Like that. Who did he upset is what I want to know for that film.
It's like Melvin Bragg meets Dracula. Half the world's looking up Melvin Bragg right now, but yeah.
That's all guys
know. We went through a couple. The very first image we used was a lower angle one where he's sort of holding the gun up towards his face. But that one in the end, it just felt right. That is, I suppose, that's the one in the center of the Living Daylights poster. And so in a sense, there's a way of, because they're lost adventures, it's this icon sort of becoming lost. Using an iconic image really sort of gets that through. And he just looks badass. He looks great, doesn't he? So
totally.
And then with the Walther on the other one, there was, I can remember Mark asking me, he'd sent me an email being like, the gun's great, but it's definitely the right gun, isn't it? Because otherwise people are gonna...
Yes,
and I just sort of went back and went, yes, Mark, it's the right gun. And I've even made it a little bit silver because the one he holds in License to Kill is kind of silver in the...
It wasn't exactly blued.
Poster shots.
Very good. Damn.
So I went for that. But we made sure we were absolutely, made sure we were airtight with those. And then the second question about getting a sneak peek, yes, I did. Mark sent me little bits. He gave me sort of, I didn't get to see it all, but he sent me, I can remember him sending me a list of sort of the things that would be included, and just getting really excited and then just getting really distracted by it and just sort of be like, oh, great, new stuff to read, and then be like, oh no, I need to do this. So yeah, it was great. It
does pull you along. Do you have, I mean, I'm going to ask you what I asked the other gentleman. Do you have a favorite excerpt, part, moment in the book?
I don't yet. I'm terrible with nonfiction books in that I just flick through them. I'd never read them in order and cover to cover. But I did like at the interview at the end with Blair Farrington. I just love how niche that is. I really loved that. And also how humble and really sort of kind he was as well in that interview.
And we've got to call out, even though the gentleman couldn't make it today, we've got to call out Pat Carbagal, who couldn't make it today, but his illustrations, what a wonderful treat. You know, it's like you go to the dentist, you don't know you're going to get a toy. Flipping the page and then hearing about these stories. Yeah, thank you, Mark, for showing that.
So Pat does great Bond illustrations, and he did all the illustrations for my first book, Many Lives. And then I had this idea, would it be cool if Pat could illustrate something that we haven't seen? So Joe is holding up a scene from the fourth unmade Bond movie with Dalton at a cemetery at the very end, and it's sort of a downbeat, wistful ending. Great for a book, but arguably not so much for a Bond movie where you want to be elevated. And this is Bond versus the robot as conceived by Pat. So this is Pat's imagination, or in the third Dalton movie, the second version of the third Dalton movie, Dalton as a cowboy.
By the way, I have to show my favorite too. This is by far my favorite because I thought of Calvin Dyson when I read this, and not to show all the illustrations.
This is John Landis's idea to dirty up Roger Moore. John Landis said that Roger Moore was always immaculate. He said, wouldn't it be cool if in the pre-title sequence of his movie, The Spy Who Loved Me, if Moore was all, came into the frame all dirty and he just
bloody.
That's what Pat's imagination is.
And his treatment, which I'm not going to give away, his treatment of that opening scene with Roger Moore, which harkened, back to some of the darker moments of For Your Eyes Only, would have been jaw-dropping, quite frankly.
Yes, and so it's so cool to help the reader imagine
Timothy Dalton as a cowboy.
Imagine what it would be. For example, one of the ideas of James Bond Jr., the animated series, and one of the things that this book does is it pays a lot of attention to James Bond Jr., the animated series. And I know that there's very few fans of it, although Pat is a fan of James Bond Jr. and was showing it to his kids. But Michael G. Wilson co-created it. It's not something that they licensed to somebody else. But if you read the series Bible, there's great hints that inform their approach to the movies. If you read the series Bible, their description of James Bond Jr. and his philosophy is really James Bond's philosophy. If you read the James Bond Jr. Bible and listen to their approach to how gadgets should be used, is really their approach in the films to how gadgets should be used. So I know that but they really put all their resources into it. Anyway, one of the early ideas for James Bond Jr. was to have the opening gun barrel sequence, which they don't do in the finished version. So Pat illustrated his imagination of what a James Bond Jr. gun barrel sequence would have been.
I got to tell you, Mark, I keep holding this one up because this really sort of woke me up, because honestly, I said to myself, if somebody told me that James Bond was going to dress up as a cowboy, I probably would have cringed. Then I saw the illustration. I said, you know what? Boy, with Dalton has a very weathered, craggly face, like handsome, but weathered. And I thought, boy, he actually could pull that off perfectly. Yeah. So I sort of instantly was on board with this.
He's got kind of a "why can't I quit you" type of look to him.
And Mark points this out in the book. Oh, sorry, Mark, go on.
No, you go. No, you, Calvin.
I was just going to say, and you address this in the book as well, as sort of like, this, the thought of Bond dressing as a cowboy might be quite silly and everything, but you remind, about Octopussy, and Moore dresses up as a gorilla in that, and it works in the context. It's one of those things that, and again, going back to Bond and the robot again, it's one of those things that you might immediately read it and be like, oh God, this sounds a bit much. But actually, when you see it in context, in the style or whatever the director goes for, it actually can work.
And once again, Timothy Dalton has kind of laid the groundwork for Daniel Craig, because Daniel Craig then went into Cowboys and Aliens with robots and a cowboy. I'm like, hang on here. I mean, did I miss Timothy Dalton do lay a cake? Maybe. But I love that image that Pat did of Dalton that you've just shown of the cowboy thing. You're right. I mean, he did Mujahideen. He did Dracula with the hair. He's like the Mr. Ben of Bonds.
Oh my gosh.
Hey, I have to say as well. Sorry, I just want to say I didn't. And if Mark did tell me, I completely forgot that I was doing the illustrations for the book. So they were a lovely surprise when I got it, and I sent in an email that was just like, why on earth didn't you get Pat to do the cover? Like, they're so good. And there's my favorite is the one of Dalton in the cemetery, and I don't know if it's the illustration or the sort of line. There's a line there that Mark talks about the blossom falling today and then tomorrow it blooms. And ever since I read that, that's really stuck in my head. And I don't know if that's because of the illustration or because of the line. And in a way, it's sort of created a new Bond moment for me that like they're just so brilliant. And the cowboy thing he just makes, that just draws him in a way that it feels believable. And originally I was the same. I was like, oh, Timothy Dalton as a cowboy, you're taking the most serious Bond and put him in this bonkers situation. It doesn't quite work. But then after I thought about it, I was like, well, actually, Fleming's books weren't so serious in a way because Dr. No had the giant squid and stuff like that. And I was like, sort of then convincing myself that actually, yeah, it would have been great. It would have really worked. And I don't think I would have got to that as much as and as wonderful as Mark's interview and prose is without those amazing illustrations. They're fantastic.
Mm.
Hey, Sean, first of all, thank you for joining us. Thank you for creating these amazingly intriguing covers. We started off the question of, can you judge a book by its cover? Not fully, but it does pull us in. And that's exactly what you did. So thank you. And by the way, if you want to re-release those panned book covers again, I wouldn't argue.
John,
drop me an email.
David. You got it.
John, before you jump off, it was my birthday the other day, and my family, who loves to put images on cups and anything, went to Snapfish and gave me.
Oh wow!
Wow!
And it's cold where we are, and so they got me a blankie with
what?
Oh, nice.
Oh.
So everybody's going to want one of those.
Oh, thank you so much, and no, just thank you to everyone at home that's really lovely and supportive. I personally don't see what you all see in my work. I look at it. I don't even. Calvin has more copies of stuff than I do. I don't keep the paper. But thank you, Mark. I think you can probably guess from what I've said is that this was a real bucket list thing for me, like a Bond book cover. So thank you for inviting me on this journey.
I'm very grateful that you did it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sean, thanks, my friend. Be good.
Thank you, everybody.
Sean, I'm a
Lovely to see
fan.
you.
Take care.
Cheers. All right, everybody. Oh, go ahead, Mark. Sorry.
I'm sorry. One little thing about book by its cover. So I didn't have anything to do with the design of this. My publisher did it, and it's a beautiful design, and I have no complaints. I remember people did not buy this book because there's an image of David Niven there instead of Lazenby or a different Bond.
Yeah.
And so it's so, and what's so nice to James Chapman, he said, don't judge a book by, he came to my defense, he said, don't judge a book by its cover. But let me quickly say two things. One, the point of having David Niven was there was to imply that this is not just about the Eon bonds, but that there's all these other bonds, including video games bonds and radio bonds. And that was sort of the tip of the hat. But it's so important to have the right cover to inform the reader what your book is about. And so we tried here, and Sean did a great job.
So folks, everybody in the chat room, panelists, co-hosts, straighten out your bow tie. We're about to class up this joint a whole hell of a lot than even what we've classed up before. Coming into the group conversation, we've got none other than Dr. Lisa Funnell coming into the room.
Hello.
So welcome.
Hey.
Hello.
Oh, hold on, her audio's connecting. Hello.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Woo! Hi.
It looks very festive in the background.
Very festive in the dog who he wants to be on screen, but he's in the most awkward position. But we both came on to say congratulations on the new book, Mark. We're very excited.
Now, Lisa, have you had a chance to read any of it, to read all of it?
No, and I did send Mark a message about this. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. But this is a stocking stuffer, so if someone wants to send it to me for Christmas, or if not, I'll probably just buy it.
Did you say stocking stuffer or stocking stuffer?
I don't know. What did my accent say?
It sounded a little stockish.
One of those things, and one of those things.
So Lisa, the fact that you haven't read it, I do have a good question for you then. As an accomplished author, we were talking earlier to other authors about some of the trials and tribulations of getting a book out, starting with a vision and then actually to completion. When you start with a vision, I mean, what is that process where you're like, I've got an idea. Now, how do I actually make this happen?
Yeah, I mean, my work is very passion based. So if it's an idea, it needs to gestate for a while. I need to think about it and think about it. And then it comes to the point, usually I'm taking a shower where, I'm not thinking about it. And then everything just starts to like, I've literally written papers, I've written book chapters in my head that I know to have, stuff outside the shower just to write it down. And so for me, it's something that's very instinctual, where I can have the structure of a book or I have an idea, and then it's a matter of filling in the spaces. And that's where, to be honest, that's where the work comes in. So for those on the panel who've written books, it's a painful process. You're sitting there, you have to go over and pour over the knowledge, and you're trying to find the words, the language, how to make things flow. For me, that's the most challenging part, is getting a rough draft. Once I have a rough draft, editing, adding, and especially if I have a collaborator, I love doing like co-written work, then you can really enhance it. But just getting that skeleton structure, it's hard. So I have a lot of respect for anybody who puts out a book, anyone who puts out, what is this, 2 books in 2 years, Mark? Are we just putting the bar real high for the rest of us?
Ouch. Well for the next one.
But by the way, I think you've called out in an unassuming way, Joe Darlington, who comes out with a book every 38 years, but his process is very similar, where he takes a bubble bath and comes up with ideas. So it's very congruent, very parallel.
You're like the J.K. Rowling of Florida, aren't you?
I was just say George R.R. Martin.
So Lisa, but the content of this. I mean, the Lost Adventures. As a Bond fan, not just an author, not just as an academic, as a Bond fan, what are you curious about? I mean, what do you love to consume when it comes to these kind of lost adventures and stories?
For me, I love to learn, and I love to learn things that I just don't know. And so there's this gap, and I want to fill in that gap. There's like a gap in my Bond knowledge, like what could have been, and what could the world of Bond look like? I kind of like filling in. I mean, I love my imagination, and Calvin will probably attest to this. We watched James Bond Jr. for our James Bond and Friends watch along. And so, I mean, that's what could have been, odd job in like a sweatsuit looking like a rapper. Like that's what could have been. But I'm really interested in seeing, what the possibilities would have been for a real action, live action story. And I have no idea. I have no idea what to expect, but I'm just really excited for just this knowledge. And I think we can all hypothesize about it. I think we all do in our own ways of what could have been, but I kind of want to know what actually could have been. Like, what were people talking about, thinking about, what was written? What were people, is there a trail? Are you following up on emails, production notes? I really want to know what's in those goodies without actually having to be the person going to the archives and doing that research. Like, I'm happy that
Lisa,
you're doing it for me.
I've got to tell you, there was one part in the book, and I won't spoil too much. I thought of you because there is a treatment of a Timothy Dalton film that is so congruent in having the male and female roles incredibly equalized. I mean, and this is back in the 1980s, and it wasn't like banging you over the head type of thing, like slowing her down in slow motion so you could see her power. It was just her being incredibly capable, and it wasn't making him look like a buffoon. It was just both of them as very capable partners in that. And it rings true to even your newest podcast that you put out, where it's not about one taking the mickey out of the other. It's about even-handedness.
Yeah. And I mean, that's what I argue for. Like, what I love about competency is the fact that James Bond is a great agent, right? Wouldn't he want to be in the field with somebody equally competent, somebody who has his back, who can handle themselves? And so when they go and complete a mission, it's the best that we have, right? Instead of having somebody that you might be dragging along the way. And I, Mark O'Connell and I have talked a bit on a different podcast, like there's different types of women, right? And so there's a difference between a trained agent and say an artist, right? And the different elements that they bring. Not everybody has to be Wei Lin, Michelle Yeoh. Everyone knows I love Michelle Yeoh. Not everybody has to be at that level. There's a range and diversity there, but I like the idea of competency, being good at what you're doing and good in your space. And I also like the idea of having a range and diversity of women who do a range of things in a film. So not everybody has to kick butt, but just be a well-rounded character and be able to contribute something to the storyline.
Can I just chip in? One of the things that Mark does get over is that the writers, Maybaum, Wilson, they were very aware that there isn't just one Bond template. There's different Bond templates. So there's, I think Maybaum describes Goldfinger as a jewel of mines, and that Thunderball, it's more of a fish out of water. Likewise, Diamonds and Live and Let Die. So yes, there's different templates of Bond structure and Bond stories. There's also, attaching to that different representations, different uses of different characters. So yes, and there's not just one Bond template. That's why Bond works. It's a registry of different templates, 24 templates or 25 maybe. Yeah.
And I did hear of late that Mark O'Connell, you were a part of a little bit of a love fest of 80s Bond women, as a matter of fact.
A little bit of a love fest. I mean, I always say, were there any Bond girls before 1981?
Not to Calvin.
Apparently Ursula Andress came out wearing a bikini on some sort of speech somewhere. No, we did, and it was a good thing. And that's actually, Sean was really useful as well. Sean Longmore, who's just left us. I love Sean. He doesn't think his knowledge fits, and my God, it so does, because he's got such an awareness of the history and the representation, whether it's Bond, whether it's a suit, whether it's women. He has a great line that when he's been doing his own work, he doesn't want to put women in the Bond women that he's portraying in bikinis, and I think that's a very interesting, especially for a younger guy as well. I think that's a really interesting discussion he's had with himself. So yeah, big 80s Bond fans here, and I love Michelle Yeoh, by the way. I need to have a chat
She's
with.
amazing.
I need to have the Lisa chat about that. I'm obsessed with her in Discovery at the moment.
So Lisa, I've got to tell you a couple things from the chat room, and I'm making sure that I pick all the good ones, but mostly there's a ton of things about Justice, your puppy galore, just everybody's impressed nature that staying on camera, first of all. And I remember seeing Justice on one of your live streams where he literally looks like he's waving. So good on you for whatever you're doing with Justice, but you have at least 4 people who are raising their hands saying, Lisa, I'm a journalist and researcher for hire if you need someone to partner with. So you've got a lot of people volunteering for some strange reason.
Here's the thing. I love collaboration. That is, as a professor, I'm tenured. Now I get to pick my projects. And if I'm going to work on something, everything that I'm doing is pretty much collaborative. I still do individual solo stuff, but I get so much from talking with and learning from somebody who's different from me, but we're studying and being passionate about the same thing. And so that's why I'm always open to collaboration, whether it's a written form, whether it's podcasting. Like, I'm open to a good conversation, and my goal is to learn. Like, I know a lot of stuff, and I know a lot of stuff from my perspective, but I'm an avid learner. I want to learn more and hear more and do more with that knowledge.
So Lisa, talk to me, because, this is a bit of a celebration of Mark Edlitz as a creator, as a content creator. But, you look at Joseph Darlington, you look at Calvin with his YouTube, Joe with one of the oldest podcasts, quite frankly. You took a jump into your own foray with License to Critique. What was the impetus in doing that?
I have done some other podcasting, and I had people commenting and writing to me saying they wanted to get more of my perspective as a woman and as an academic. And I don't think people are necessarily interested in simply just reading my work. I'm not an avid reader. I know that sounds weird as someone who writes books, but I do so much writing and so much reading for my work that I'm not interested in doing any additional reading. And so I like audiobooks. And
oh, wow.
And so for me, I felt that was probably the best forum, would be as a way to share some of my ideas. And I've been studying Bond for 20 years. I've been writing on Bond for almost 2 decades, and I have a lot of knowledge. But I also think my goal is not just to be an academic, but to be a bridge between some of the conversations we have in academia, which are amazing, and also some of the people that I know who are doing brilliant work, and just being that bridge to the rest of the Bond community, because people are asking for this knowledge and they want this knowledge. And I think that I have the capacity to translate what we do in the scholarly world. And I'm also the type of scholar who believes that complicated things don't have to be described in complicated ways. I'm not big on jargon. I try not to use too much terminology. If I use a term, I define it. That's my mode of teaching anyways. That's the way that I am as an educator. So I think I'm a good person who can sort of connect what's going on in one pocket and try to bring it to the rest. And this is, by the way, there's paywalls, there's money paywalls between the expense of academic books, paying for journals. I have an issue with all of it. And so I'm happy to take my research and put it in a vocal form and make sure that it is accessible to everyone. And I never expect anybody, like if you want to buy my book, rock on, but I never expect people to buy anything that I do. I know that's the worst thing to say, Mark, as we're talking about your book launch, but it's that idea of, for me, more so getting the knowledge out there as a researcher in that way. But buy Mark's book.
there is a moment in Mark's book where he talks about the writers of Bond all coming together, and there's a word that I'm going to use that you used, that Broccoli's used. They said to the writers, keep it simple. Always keep it simple. And so one guy, without giving too much away, pitched something, and at the end of it, he goes, see, simple. There's the motivation for the bad guy. And then that's why for me, I mean, Mark Edlitz, I mean, you can speak to this. Obviously, you wanted Lisa on because of the content she creates as a fellow author. But I mean, what was kind of your drive in making sure that she's a part of the group?
I first reached out for my first book, The Many Lives of James Bond, which was primarily or exclusively interviews with Bond creators. And I just felt like there was another voice that was missing that I couldn't provide. And I felt it would be irresponsible is overstating, but it would be a missing part of the book if I didn't have this voice and this expertise. And then so I reached out, and all the questions were sort of framed in how does it reveal Bond's character, and that was sort of the way into it. But it just if I felt like I had a hole in my knowledge, and the good doctor's work helped inform it. And so whenever someone asks me, about, Bond and representation or gender, I just say, look at this book.
Can I just add here that Lisa, I've really enjoyed being on, different chats and different discussions with Lisa, but it's really, I'm going to say it's really, really important and vital that we get more women talking about Bond. And I know that there are women out there talking about Ladies Who Bond, Luella, Monica, Jemena. There are lots. I just think it's really important to get a different perspective, as well as different nationalities as well. And Lisa's sort of ticking a box very, very firmly and brilliantly as well. So I'm kind of glad to be in the mix when I get asked to do things and she's there.
So, Mark, I think you got your wish, because and Lisa, I don't mean to peel away the onion. I don't think it's a secret, but correct me if I'm wrong. You've been very busy today. Weren't you a keynote speaker of a ladies only Zoomcast of Bond fans?
Yeah, and it was hosted by Ladies Who Bond, and it was to bring women together to talk about James Bond and our fandom and our experiences. And so as the keynote, I just talked about my experiences being a woman, being a scholar, in a sense, oftentimes having the situation that's on this podcast right now, where I'm the only woman sort of in the room at the moment. It doesn't mean that there aren't others. And I agree with Mark's statement. I speak as a woman. I am not the only woman, and I try to amplify the voices and the identities of other women. But it was so nice to be amongst other women to talk about our experiences, whether we were talking about merchandising, we were talking about, things that we see in the films. And to me, that type of experience is what I get in the classroom. I teach mostly women, trans, and non-binary students in my James Bond course. So I get a completely different perspective. There are some men, but I get a completely different perspective. And I love hearing a range of voices. And I would love to have more women, and specifically women of color and LGBTQIA+ individuals, really coming to the table and giving their perspectives.
And the only reason I knew about that is I believe there was one of my family members was on that Zoomcast, meeting my wife.
Yes.
I hope you were kind to her. That's all I asked.
We're very nice to each other.
Okay. By the way, I have a question, and I don't think it's controversial. I mean, I think we're all comfortable, and we're in this wonderful. By the way, it's an open bar, Lisa. I don't know if you heard. It's free. You could get the eggnog. It's fine. Is it, what kind of challenges do you face as a Bond fan where Bond, to some could be, like Joe and I, misogynistic creatures, relics from, the Cold War, if you will, because you do celebrate it, but you also have some firm opinions as well. What's that straddle line that you have?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to be able to critique any sort of text. It's what I do for a living. But we critique things that we like all the time. And there is a space to be a fan and to like aspects. I mean, I love the fact that James Bond has no boundaries. He can go to any place. He can be respected for who he is from the outset. He's never held back by systematic oppression, and he can sleep with whoever he wants. And he's never judged as being, promiscuous. And like, that's a bad thing that would hold him back. And he does some pretty amazing things to save the world, right? And he goes on adventures in beautiful places and so on. Like, there's a lot of things that are very attractive about Bond, but at the same time, there are things that as a woman, I'm not necessarily a fan of. Like, I think affirmative consent is incredibly important. I like to see capable and competent women on screen, and I like to see visual diversity too. I want to see, the films reflect the beauty and the spectrum that exists in society. And so I think that there's a place for you to say, I'm a fan and I really like this text, but I can want a little bit more from it. And we don't have to simply accept everything or think it's an all or nothing binary, right? That we have to like absolutely everything. And if we have issues and if we talk about it, and if we critique any small part, that somehow makes us less of a fan. I think that in a sense, it makes us even more engaged as fans to be able to have these types of conversations about representation and be able to move the conversation forward, but doing it in a way that is constructive and respectful. Like, I'm not the type of person to say, if you like Bond or if you like all of these messages, that somehow you are, a devious human being and, cast you away. I think we need to come to this as mature adults and respect each other and have, thoughtful dialogue about, these texts that we consume, because we don't just watch them, we perform them. We have a martini dry, shaken, not stirred. We dress in cosplay. We repeat the dialogue that we hear. I expect you to die. I mean, we constantly utilize this stuff in our everyday lives. And so we should critique what we're watching, but we can do it in a way that is respectful to each other.
I love the idea. Oh, go ahead, Mark.
No, it shouldn't be terrifying as well. There's this horrible phrase woke, and everyone panics because there's a second actress has been cast in a Bond film. Oh my God, they've demasculated Bond, and it's like, what? Did you not notice all the women? Yes, draping around Bond, particularly in the '60s, but there's always been, when people say, oh, but there's knee-jerk reactions. We've had it in the last year with some casting in No Time to Die, and it's kind of icky and horrible to witness. And I know it's not the main opinion, but it is still an opinion that kind of bubbles around a bit. But Bond has always done that. There has always been different women from different ethnic backgrounds. Yes, sometimes a bit more subservient, sometimes a bit more passive, but they've been there. They've also been there in high-powered jobs. I said recently that you might have Dink being, having her backside slapped and quite horrendously flung away in a way we would never get in any film or any walk of life now, hopefully. But within that same film, Goldfinger, you've got Pussy Galore running a troop of pilots who happen to be women, and she's doing okay. And then we have Fiona Volpe in the next film, who's this, yes, she's beautifully couturied, but she's also a hard ass bitch who's literally pulling Bond's strings for like half the film. So I really respect that some voices like Lisa's and Jocelyn as well from Ladies Who Bond are out there. It's just like, don't worry, guys. And it tends to be the guys who panic and worry about it. It's not that the James, how No Time to Die will end will be as familiar possibly as any other Bond film. It's not going to, one thing that Mark's book does is they're very conscious of, you can change the recipe, you can change the ingredients, but you still have to use the same oven. You still have to serve up the meal on the same plate. And that's what Bond has always done.
To bring it back to Mark's book, Lisa, we got to get her a bookmark, by the way. I can't keep having this conversation with her like this. I'll send you mine, Lisa. We're in the same country. But one of the things I think you're going to like is there is a discussion in there I specifically remember where they talk about the strength of the female partner to bond, but not being a gimmick, like not being a sledgehammer, not even calling it out. Quite frankly, making it almost like a very natural occurrence. Like you and I are having a very equal conversation right now. Nobody's, putting an aura around you. Nobody's putting an aura around me. And that's the whole thing is, don't make it a gimmick because that actually dismantles the power of each other, I think. How you doing, Mark Edlitz? This going well?
Yeah, no, I love it. I'm having a great time.
Okay, good. And by the way, we're getting questions from a lot of people. I can't even imagine that we didn't say this first off. Is the book out? Mark, I believe me, it's available, correct?
Yes, the book is out. Amazon is probably the best way to get it. I would order the one with the cover just because with the Dalton on it, the layout's a little bit better, but it's the same content irrespective of what cover you get.
I noticed someone asked earlier on about there's the page numbers are different depending on the cover. Is that correct?
Different printers and different. Each printer had a different configuration, and so I prefer the configuration and the layout for the Dalton one. But it's the same words.
Yeah.
And somebody also asked, Mark, will you be doing any signed versions?
If it were not, the short answer is I don't think so right now, just because of the.
You don't want to go to Times Square in New York right now and sign some copies?
I'm just that's why we're meeting together like this. So I don't think so. Not in the immediate future.
No, absolutely.
But I appreciate the question. Thank you.
We've got a few minutes to go. Mark Edlitz, I'd like you to really monopolize the time. You've had a series of guests. They've been fantastic. Joe Darlington's pediatric bladder couldn't hold to like 5 more minutes. Poor guy. Dude, I'm older than you and I've held out. Come on,
pretend
man.
you didn't see that. I no, there was something
Pretend I
else
didn't
happening.
see that. We've got
We
got
heard
like
it.
hundreds of people watching this. Even Puppy Galore, said something about it.
I'm old. Leave me alone.
Mark, you have the floor, my friend.
Oh, this discussion of sort of what we leave in and what we leave out is sort of central to the book, and that's why I was just sort of being quiet and listening to it. It also made me think that we tend to, because many Bond writers are also English language writers, so there's also original content in other languages. That's why I included these 59 Spanish zigzag comics that Comics Royale has transcribed adapted the first 7 into English. That's why I reached out and went through them all and sort of did my own bad translations and interviewed the Spanish-speaking writer of that, because it's not available in the United States doesn't make the content any less important. Oh, see what this is? It's James Bond fighting a Yeti. So
because of course
that's worth the price of the book alone.
59 Zigzag did 59 comics in Spanish language. There's James Bond dressed up as a bee and flying around in a jetpack. So this writer did faithful adaptations.
Calvin's newest artwork coming.
Was that? The writer did faithful adaptations of Ian Fleming's novels, and he did them all. He did The Spy Who Loved Me, more faithful than the movie. He did Casino Royale. He even did a prequel to Casino Royale. But he also came up with all these sort of over the top, sometimes, adventures, including Bond dressed up as a bee and flying around in a jetpack. But just because it's not written in English doesn't mean we shouldn't take it seriously. And we've spent a lot of time correctly talking about Dalton's Bond, just because that's the most compelling, I guess, draw of the book. But there's also these other areas of lost Bond material, including, like the Dark Horse comics would do this run of Dark Horse publishers did this run of Bond comics, and there'd be like this one weird line that says like, "Oh, this character is still on the loose," and I started to wonder, was that the end of that story, or is there more? And so I would track down these people, and they would tell me, "Oh no, there's more. There's a whole other story that would have gone with this had this not had the publishing company lost the license, had they not lost the license." So the book also looks at all these weird comics that have never been made, or complete story runs that are incomplete. It looks at James Bond Jr. and all those novelizations, interviews with the co-director, the co-creator, many of the writers, the people who wrote the novelizations, the people who wrote the choose your own adventure stories. What else?
There was the Sean Connery. The Sean Connery thing was amazing.
Which bit?
The Sean Connery.
Oh, yeah, the lost Sean Connery performance. And one of the things that the book does is, for 50 years or so, there was a mystery of who wrote the lost, the Adventures of James Bond Jr. 003 and a half. The writer on the cover is R.D. Mascot. R.D. Mascot is a pseudonym. And so nobody knew who wrote it. So I tracked it down. I interviewed Toby Stephens about playing James Bond on the radio 8 times. He's played Bond more times than Roger Moore, who did 7, or Sean Connery, who did 7 as well. So it's all it's not just Dalton Bond, it's just a lot of weird Bond stuff. Sorry.
I want to give all of our guests just a moment to either say something about the book, or Mark, Dr. Lisa Funnell. Let's start with you. And also, for those of you not subscribing to License to Critique, the podcast, I suggest you do. You're going to find it informative. It's on my favorites. So, Dr. Lisa.
So I'm having not read Mark's book, put that one out there. But the one thing I really appreciate about Mark is the fact that he's thinking. He's willing to think through, and we've had conversations offline about the use of terminology, about the intention of writing. And for me, at the end of the day, anybody who is a writer, I just ask you to take those moments to think about the terms that we use, the significance, the relation of power and advantage that might come through that language. And, anytime I can have a conversation with somebody like Mark, who is that engaged, who reaches out to me to have these types of conversations, it makes me value the work and their output a lot. And so I know that there's a lot of thought that's been put into not only the content in terms of the research and relaying, this lost history in so many multifaceted ways. And I'm going to get the book, but it is put together in a way that is thoughtful and in a way that is understanding the power of language, so the power of how he is conveying this information. And I think that that's something that is incredibly important. And so you definitely a lot of respect to you for doing that and being so thoughtful. Sage words.
Joseph Darlington, as the author of Being James Bond, only volume one.
Wow.
Some last parting words.
Simply that I found reading Mark's book, it felt like the perfect balance. In fact, maybe that's not even the right word. It's almost like being able to absorb yourself in nonfiction and fiction at the same time. Because as you read the sort of lost adventures, I'm speaking specifically about the Dalton era. Honestly, it feels like absorbing the third Dalton film that we never got. And I was able to enjoy it as a piece of fiction because I'm just sort of drinking in what would have been, but also, again, enjoying the perspective that the book gives, that we're looking at this from a point of view, a moment of time that we'll never be able to relive. And as been said, that's only part of the book. I mean, seriously, you want to talk about just feeling a little awkward about not getting your second book out in how many years? And this guy put this gigantic book out. It's got weight. It's a big one. It's loaded with really good stuff, and all of it is fascinating. And honestly, it really does run a gambit when you talk about the different looks at Bond. I think that's one of the things that we sort of also talk about at great length. Well, what if Bond did this? And what if we had, Bond did all these other things? This book looks at all of it. And it's boy, I mean, it is a very sumptuous book. It's a satisfying read, and I absolutely recommend it to everyone.
Excellent. And by the way, as the author of a book, and I'm not exaggerating, that I reread probably once a year because it's so nostalgic and it's such a part of a mirror image of my childhood. Mark O'Connell, last words.
From John Landis talking about the myth of British confidence through to that Eon insistence on just putting the balloons. I mean, Richard Maybaum talks about the balloon of a script, that what we tethered to, what are we holding up here? But the Eon particularly are throwing out loads of balloons of ideas, and I particularly in that allegedly fallow period of the 6-year gap between 89 and 95, the amount of attempts that they were doing just to push Bond forward is stunning. And then I think one of the great lines in the book, and I saw it today, and it's Mark says, Bond fans don't agree on much. And I thought, and then he says that we do, and he moved on. But I just think that's a lovely line, because we don't. But what we do agree on is our love of Bond and our fascination with Bond and our fascination with the what ifs. Because we, like Joe says, we all sit in the pub and the bar and go, well, what if they'd done that? Or what if she'd been in that? Or what if he'd done that? And I think it's a testament to the what ifs. It's just a really good book. And as I said at the beginning of all of this, I don't recommend books. I'm a writer. I get prickly about someone else doing a Bond book. I thought I did the Bond book. Who else is doing one? But no. I was very happy. I mean, Mark's a lovely guy. We've kind of passed in social media corridors before, but I would urge people to buy it. It's beyond the beautiful cover. It's just interesting. I mean, we've all been into Bond for way too long, but to find Bond interesting in a book, it's up there with Some Kind of Hero and the other books that really just document the effort that goes into us, and it might be 2 hours for us with a bottle of co-op prosecco, and we'll hate a scene or hate a song, but this is people's lives. This is their religion, the people that make them, let alone us. And I think Mark documents and pays great tribute to that, and it's a different tribute as well.
If I can just echo the niceties that everyone else has said as well, because it really is, I think particularly what Lisa said about Mark has done so much of the hard work so that we don't have to. The amount of times I might have seen a James Bond Jr. episode and kind of wondered, like, well, what is the writer's Bible like? Or what did the writers think about being on this kind of stuff? And I do love that it's incredibly accessible for even casual Bond fans, I'll say. But it works on that, on both sides. Like, there's so much new stuff in that, me thinking of myself as a really big fan, like, I didn't know, and I'm learning through this. And I think no matter what the level of your Bond fandom is, if you have an interest in Bond, you'll really get something out of this. And I think another one of the great things about both of your books, there's that great Pierce Brosnan quote about more men have, walked on the moon than have played James Bond. And obviously he's referring to on the big screen. But it's not true, really. Like, when you take into account all of the, performances at the Oscars or the video game voice actors and all of that kind of stuff. And I really like that you really do shine the spotlight on a lot of those people, whether they're actually playing Bond, voicing Bond, or writing Bond behind the scenes, or everything like that. I think that you do a really great service, really, to Bond fandom to give us these wonderful books. So thank you for that very much.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Well, good. You should be emotionally disarmed. I will say, I do want to call this out because this is going to sit as a video well past this live stream. And although we've had an incredible chat room that's been incredibly active, we are going to put the link below. There is the danger of some people watching this and thinking, oh, well, this is a 2-hour plug. It's a 2-hour commercial. I do want to point out the people that joined today. We're so passionate because what Mark Edlitz has done, he's expanded our universe. We thought the universe was this big and he expanded it this big. And it's always fascinating that something that is nearly 60 years old, longer actually, can really be expanded in something new. And we were so passionate. We came together, whether it was Lisa, Mark O'Connell, Calvin, Joe, everybody that joined today, the Chapmans, we took the time out because we were passionate about it. We support this book. We support all the creation and all the creative that's being done. It's not exclusive. The one thing I'm going to say at the very end of this is that if you think it's exclusive to any one person, it isn't. Every individual, whether you're in a chat room or Instagram or in a channel or even by yourself, can create something, and you can own a corner of this world because the world is huge. So I want to thank everybody for joining today. I want everybody to be. Oh, you thought of something to say. Good.
I had something to say, but then I got a little full and then I stopped.
You got
talking.
verklempt, as they say in New
It
York.
was better for everyone.
Yes.
5 things. One, Calvin helped me discover a new James Bond from a video game who I had previously missed. 2, if I wasn't looking at the chat, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to find me on Facebook or Twitter and send me a message, or just email me. I'm happy to answer any questions. I haven't looked at the chat, so I apologize if I didn't address something. 3, people have been so nice here and in social media. It's when you write a book, you're writing it all by yourself. For a while, I would just write stuff and put it in my drawer and not share it with anyone. And to get the kind of kindness that you've all shown me it's just very, very gratifying. And I thank you.
Thanks, brother.
Cheers to
Well,
that.
thank you. It's well deserved. It's well deserved. And this is an emotional journey we're on. It's a nostalgically emotional journey, and we're all connected by one core thing, but those things fall away very quickly. And what we're left with is people, good people. And that's what the Bond community is.
And no book launch is ever as fun as this. Book launches are like, you invite all the people who won't buy the book, or they'll buy it because they're family. But this has actually been a lot more fun. Seriously.
Yeah, but
Agreed.
hold on a second. Where did Justice go?
Oh yeah. There we go.
Okay, I got a little nervous for a second.
He's still there. He just wanted to he likes to.
Oh.
I'm just saying, as per Justice's contract, he's got to be on for 36 minutes. No, not a minute less. All right, folks. First of all, thank you, everybody in the chat room. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, all the guests, for joining us. We're going to be doing this real soon because it's so much fun, as Mark O'Connell said. Have a wonderful Saturday. Enjoy your weekend. Everybody, take care out there.
Cheers.
Thank you all.
See ya.
Thanks for coming.
Cheers.
Okay, don't go off the live stream. Hold on a second. Don't go off. Hold on.